What the heck is going on in the 49ers building? The primary wave of free agency is over, and a lot of people are confused. Good thing is, I have strategy answers. We're going to take a look at how the 49ers have built successful teams, specifically defensive lines in the past. We're going to look at the models for this 49ers strategy and construction. And by the end of this show, you should have a really good idea of what is happening in Santa Clara. Welcome in. This is your 49ers alarm update to wake you up on Friday, give you a recap of what happened on Thursday. The highlight for San Francisco was the release of long snapper Tabor Pepper and the addition of 39-year-old long snapper John Weeks, an upgrade at the long snapper position for the 49ers. A little bit more expensive. They're paying about $100,000 extra for John Weeks. Texans fans not very happy that they lost a 15-year stalwart. Be like Brian Jennings, who was the 49ers long snapper for 13 years, going off to another team. Brian Jennings simply retired after the 49ers cut him in 2013. Anyway, it is time to talk 49ers strategy, because I think that at the core, it is simple, but there's a lot of noise out there and people see players cut. There have been a lot of players cut for the 49ers, and they don't quite understand the direction, and we don't have the full picture yet because the NFL draft hasn't happened, and the draft is probably the central piece of San Francisco's strategy. They're trying to draft to the Purdy and Bosa core, but let me simplify this into 3 steps. The first step of the 49ers construction this offseason has been to gut spending fat, but keep the pillars. So look at this. The 49ers have let a lot of guys leave the building, some by expiring contracts, some via cuts, but $321 million of contract money has been signed with 49ers departures to other teams. That is the most on a team's departing free agents in NFL history. So as far as gutting spending fat, the 49ers have done that more aggressively than any team ever. On top of that, the 49ers have only spent $37 million on free agents. So their spending deficit, $284 million, is the largest in NFL history by over $80 million. So just keep this in mind, because we're going to get to the expenditures, get to the talent inflow in a little bit. But remember that I say gut the spending fat, but keep the pillars. Well, who are the pillars? Take a look at the roster. The pillars are shaded in yellow. So for the 49ers, you have to look at this as a remodel. The Rams called what they did a couple years ago a remodel, and I'm going to talk about their entire template for this because it seems that the 49ers are definitely following it. If you were to completely rebuild the construction, you would remove the pillars as well. But the 49ers are keeping the central A-list pillars of their football team, and they're rebuilding or remodeling around them. So they're not rebuilding the entire structure. It's Brock Purdy at quarterback, Christian McCaffrey at running back, George Kittle at tight end, Trent Williams along the offensive line, Nick Bosa, defensive end, Fred Warner at linebacker, Diamaro Lenore at cornerback. I think a future potential pillar is Malik Mustafa, but he's still got to deliver at least another year of really good football. Do I think they can use more pillars? Of course. I think they're short at defensive tackle right now, and I think they're short along the interior offensive line, although you could say that Dominic Puni might be emerging into a pillar for the 49ers. So after you gut the spending and keep the pillars, step 2 is to zero in on the NFL draft. This is something that the Rams have done. This is something that the Eagles have done. This is something that any good team does. And every team is always trying to add talent through the draft. But the teams that have taken it to the extreme recently and have drafted well while taking it to that extreme have actually seen the best results in the entire NFL. And that's where I want to get to the Rams model. Interestingly enough, one of their former executives, James Gladstone, is now the GM of the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are in a very similar position to the 49ers entering this draft in that they have 10 picks and they plan to spend heavily on the defensive line, the current position of shortage for the 49ers and also for Jacksonville. Listen to James Gladstone, and remember, as he speaks, remember that he used to work for the Rams, and we're going to take a look at that Rams model.
Evaluate, you guys didn't address defensive line, edge, in terms of your approach of what is already here and maybe what still needs to be added to the roster on those positions.
Yeah, we got 10 picks in this year's draft. We're going to have some spots that are actually open for them to insert. So, if you add a veteran at this point, could be just standing in the way. We're going to allow these rookies to, get a chance to get out on the field and help us this coming fall.
If you add a veteran at this point, he could just be standing in the way. So what James Gladstone is saying is mid-tier veterans, guys who are flawed football players, not really worth it if you've got a draft class that is absolutely loaded. I've said many times, 41 defensive tackles were invited to this year's NFL Combine, only 25 last year. Just gives you an idea of the numbers. It's not even worth it to talk about specific players at this very moment because we're taking the bird's eye view right now because the draft is a dartboard crapshoot anyway, right? I mean, if you have more players and more picks, you have a better chance of hitting. It's a shotgun approach. If you're just zeroed in on one guy or one spot, the chances of success are going to be lower. So anyway, James Gladstone wants as many chances to succeed. That comes through the 10 draft picks, but he also wants to make sure that those rookies can compete and create a hungry defensive line on Jacksonville's roster, because that's exactly what the Rams did a couple years ago. The Rams formula, James Gladstone was part of it, looked like this. It was a cycle for the Rams in 2021. They won the Super Bowl 12-5, Super Bowl win. In 2022, they tried to run it back, but they finished 5-12. Then they ran through a big roster and cost efficiency reset. In 2023, 10-7, 2024, 10-7, playoffs both times. If you look at the 49ers cycle right now, they went 12-5 in 2023. Unfortunately for them, they lost in overtime of the Super Bowl. 2024, they tried to run it back. They pushed all the chips all in, and, well, they went 6-11. So what we're seeing now, because the team wasn't good, is a big roster and cost efficiency reset. What will happen in 2025? Well, I think they're trying to emulate what the Rams are doing in that season. Anyway, the Rams zeroed in on the NFL draft. They tore down a lot of the fat on the roster. They wanted to open the doors for competition of young defensive linemen, particularly, so they could rebuild that portion of the team. James Gladstone just talks about the Jacksonville Jaguars planning to do the same thing. And of course, his time on the Rams has given him confidence that this can work moving forward. What the Rams also did, and what the 49ers have done this offseason, based on what we've seen so far, is treat free agency as an extension of the NFL draft. So the lifeblood of the NFL is cost-controlled youth. This is a young man's league. That's where you get the hunger. That's where you get the best chance of health in the NFL because it's such a violent sport. That's where you get team speed, which is more important than ever in modern day football. So you want to have a younger roster if possible. Of course, you want your star players. You need the guys who can bring the oomph, who can bring the playmaking ability, who can deliver in the clutch. That's why you keep your core. But at the margins, because you can't build a team of 53 A-list core guys. It's not possible, right? At the margins, you would like to have youth and speed. Obviously, skill is very important too, but youth and speed are the important margin fillers in the NFL. So cost-controlled youth is what gets you the speed, is what gets you the type of hungry skill that can augment the pillars of a football team. And that obviously comes through the NFL draft. The way that you extend the NFL draft is by getting as many picks as possible. The 49ers have amassed 21 comp picks over a 4-season stretch, and they're on pace for 25 over 5. That's the most in the NFL. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it, especially if you're in cost-cutting mode, if you're trimming the fat of the roster to open the door for the future. Another way to do it is to make sure that your free agency emulates how the NFL draft works. So we can take a look at who the 49ers have signed so far this year. The signings are shaded in teal. Defensively, especially, the 49ers are in a position where they are rebuilding through extended draft picks. That's what I call them. Somebody like Richie Grant, somebody like Jason Pinnock. These are two safeties. Pinnock just signed a deal for $2.2 million, fully guaranteed. 25-year-old player, young player, still a lot of potential. Robert Saleh coached him on the Jets back in 2021. Somebody who is not making a lot of money, so this is cost-controlled youth. Somebody with a very specific upside. Jason Pinnock has a 40-inch vertical leap, so he's got a lot of explosion, and he was PFF's highest graded pass rusher coming from the safety position last year for the New York Giants. But somebody who's also flawed in that he hadn't been a great cover guy, so he was available at a cost-controlled price. That's sort of like the bottom rounds of the draft, right? I mean, you're not going to find a perfect player in the 5th, 6th, or 7th round unless his name is Brock Purdy, who ended up being a pretty damn good player. But nobody's perfect, even in the first round. The chances of landing somebody without a discernible flaw, an overtly obvious flaw late in the draft, are not very good. Kind of like the chances of finding somebody without an overtly obvious flaw at the lower price levels of free agency. But if you can focus on a very specific positive, something that you believe you can leverage, like Jason Pinnock's explosiveness, got the 35-inch, 40-inch vertical, almost an 11-foot broad jump, and you look at your team weaknesses and you say, boy, we were really bad at run defense last year, and we're terrible at run defense. Part of the reason was that the safeties weren't as good as they could be, especially Jair Brown, who regressed. Why don't we bring in somebody to compete with Jair Brown? Why don't we find somebody who's still hungry at a cost-controlled rate? That is essentially like adding a draft pick. So I consider Jason Pinnock another draft pick for the 49ers this year. Somebody whom they believe has true potential, but they were able to acquire at a reasonable cost. Same thing with Richie Grant. He's got a great three-cone time, so he should be able to work well in closed quarters, trying to fix that number 29 49ers run defense. Trey Brown, this is Moneyball, right? You go back to Billy Bean and the Oakland A's and Moneyball. Trey Brown was the number 1 graded corner in press coverage in 2023 for the Seattle Seahawks, but he suffered through an ankle injury in 2024, so that really lowered his value. So the 49ers were able to find him at a lower price. Trey Tomlinson claimed off waivers from the Rams. The reason he was waived, he's only 5'8". It's like the island of misfit toys, right? When they talked about in Moneyball, if you could find a way to make these different pieces fit, you can work your way toward a cost-efficient defense. But this is only the start. You're only treating free agency as the extension of the draft. Then you have to get to the actual draft. And that's why we're going to look at how the Eagles, Rams, and a very successful 49ers team have built their defensive lines. The 2019 49ers is where we can start. They are on the left. I made these graphics, and I shaded draft picks in gold in the middle column. The main column that you're going to want to take a look at is on the middle, because that tells you how the 49ers acquired each of these players. In 2019, you see a lot of gold shading, and this was the number 2 defense. This is one of the most monstrous defensive lines, I think, in NFL history. There were some injuries by December that weakened this line, and they roared back in January throughout the postseason. But look at how the 49ers built it. And this is over multiple regimes, right? This goes back to 2015 when the 49ers drafted Eric Armstead. But Bosa, a draft pick. Eric Armstead, a draft pick. Solomon Thomas, a draft pick. Ronald Blair, draft pick. DeForest Buckner, draft pick. DJ Jones, draft pick. Julian Taylor, draft pick. Contavious Street, draft pick. And Kevin Givens, undrafted free agent. So also a rookie, somebody picked up through the draft process. So this is a very, very robust 49ers team that obviously built the defensive line through the NFL draft. Last year's 49ers team, which ranked number 29 in run defense, looked like this as far as defensive line composition. There was a whole lot less gold shading in the middle. You still had Bosa. You had Robert Beal. In the defensive tackle position, you had Evan Anderson, Kalia Davis, and Kevin Givens. Givens, a holdover back from the 2019 49ers. So the 49ers in 2024 were built much more through free agency, through the trade for Malik Collins, from the outside with older veterans. The result was a defensive line that was nowhere near as hungry or good as the 2019 defensive line. The shading there in the middle that you wanted to see in gold wasn't there. So what the 49ers have done is they've gutted the spending fat. They've let Leonard Floyd go. They've let Malik Collins go. Two guys who are going to be on the wrong side of 30 who contributed poor run defense. They might have been good pass rushers, but the biggest part of the problem for the 49ers is that the run defense finished down at number 29. And as James Gladstone said, the Jags executive who used to be with the Rams, those are guys who are veterans who are no longer going to be in the way of rookies as the 49ers zero in on the NFL draft. Now, speaking of Gladstone, speaking of models that have worked, obviously the 2019 model for the 49ers worked. How about we look at the Rams and the Eagles themselves? Remember that you want as much shading as possible in that middle column. The Rams in 2024 built their defensive line almost entirely through the NFL draft or undrafted free agency, but it's still cost-controlled rookie acquisition. Byron Young, Jared Verse, Kobe Turner down here, Braden Fisk. I mean, this is a draft-heavy defensive line. This is what the Rams did to build. Very different than this from the 49ers. So the 49ers are trying to go from this on the right to something that looks like what the Rams are doing on the left. The Super Bowl champion Eagles, they built this up through the NFL draft. Josh Sweat, Nolan Smith, Jalix Hunt. Brandon Graham, that's funny because he's a 2010 draft pick for the Philadelphia Eagles. So he's been around for a really long time. He's a special player. But a defensive tackle, Jalen Carter, Milton Williams. This was the best defensive line in football, and it completely destroyed Patrick Mahomes and company in the Super Bowl. Built through multiple drafts, but especially built through recent drafts. And the Rams, I think that underscores what you can do in just a couple years. So the 49ers are obviously copying the Rams. They want this. They want to build through the NFL draft. They see the very strong defensive line class. That is the biggest gaping hole on the 49ers roster right now, is right at defensive line, especially a defensive tackle. And they are going to want to add cost-controlled rookie premium talent with the 11 draft picks that they have, maybe even more if they trade down from number 11. They're going to want to restock this defensive line on the fly. So looking at how the Eagles, Rams, and 2019 49ers have built this is extremely relevant and extremely important. I go back to this, the cycles of the Rams and the 49ers. Where will San Francisco go next? Because if this does follow the Rams process, they can be right back to winning in 2025. You know, there are four things that the 49ers need to improve, I think, over everything else. I call them the big four, the four pillars for San Francisco. One is run defense, and that ties directly into the defensive line additions here. And that's why the 49ers have gutted the defensive line, because it wasn't any good against the run last year. They're number 29 against the run. You're never going to win the Super Bowl at number 29 against the run. Two is running ability on offense, and I think that starts with the offensive line. The 49ers ranked number 31 last season on third and fourth down and short, so trying to pick up 1 yard to go on third and fourth and short. The third is separation. That's wide receiver, tight end, running back separation in the pass game. 49ers ranked dead last in the league. And the fourth is special teams. The 49ers also ranked dead last in the league. If you can fix those four facets of the game as the 49ers, or at least improve them, which shouldn't be that hard, you will have a better football team in 2025. And guess what? You finished ranked dead last or second to last or really close to last in all those categories, even with all these guys on your team. So the $321 million exodus, those players were on the roster last year, and the 49ers still ranked absolutely horribly in those 4 key categories, which are big-time indicators of team strength. So that is why you go through the 3-step process of gutting the spending fat and only keeping the pillars who you believe are going to perform at an A-list level moving forward, because you were too old, too slow, too hurt, too bad against the run, too poor at separating, too bad at special teams, and too bad running the football when the opponents knew that you had to run it. You were too bad at all those things last year to succeed, which is why you finished 6-11. You realize what the Rams did after 2022, that, okay, diminishing returns. The ROI is not there anymore. You might have pushed it all the way to a Super Bowl by spending a ton of money, but it's time to get younger. It's time to get faster. It's time to get more cost efficient. It is time to focus on the draft after you go 5-12 in the Rams case or 6-11 in the 49ers case. So the big roster cost efficiency reset is here. That is where the 49ers are right now. So that should help answer what exactly the 49ers are doing. It is simple, in my opinion. It is build around the core. The Rams called it a remodel. They had their pillars. For them, it was Matthew Stafford, Aaron Donald, and Cooper Kupp. For the 49ers, I think they actually have a head start on the Rams because, A, they've already nailed a good 2024 draft class. The Rams did not have a good 2022 draft class relative to what they were able to do in 2023 and 2024. And I think whereas the Rams had Matthew Stafford, Aaron Donald, and Cooper Kupp, the 49ers actually have a bigger weight-bearing core than the Rams. They have Purdy, they have McCaffrey, they have Kittle, they have Williams, they have Bosa, they have Warner, they have Deommodore Lenoir. Now, can the 49ers add a little bit more in free agency before the draft, which is still in about a month and a half, to help shepherd along some of these younger players that they bring in? Sure, absolutely. And I personally, I thought that maybe Dalvin Tomlinson would be a good addition. He went for quite a bit of money to the Arizona Cardinals. I'm now looking at Calais Campbell, who's still available, 38-year-old defensive tackle, but he's still playing at an extremely high level. I mean, we're talking grades above 80 every single season. But I look at him more as a Richard Sherman type for the 49ers. Somebody, when they signed Sherman in 2018, following his time with the Seahawks, he was on the field during OTAs, even though he's still recovering from the Achilles. And he was like a coach on the field. And his impact as far as tutoring younger players was felt long after he left the roster. And I think that the 49ers, because they have that dearth at defensive tackle that you see right here, I'll highlight it on the screen. This is at the defensive tackle position where you've got Elliott, Givens, Anderson, and Kalia Davis. Because there is that hole at defensive tackle, I get it. You're going to want to bring in draftees, and you don't want guys standing in front of them. But I think Calais Campbell could be somebody that guides the draftees along. I still remember the game against Miami this year, the stunt move that he ran to hit Purdy on that interception, sealed the game, completely confused Jake Brendel. The timing, the nuance, the vet savvy that Calais Campbell brought to that pass rush. It's not all about physicality and speed. It's about some deception that you can create. It is about the small things. I think you can impart that on the 49ers youngsters. But I digress. There are different ways to build this, right? Obviously, the 49ers need to add more talent into the defense especially. And obviously, this might be a situation of growing pains. I show you the Rams and the defensive line that they've built over the years. And it's been recently. In 2024, they were actually the number 29 defense over the first 3 months of the season. But then they figured it out. And over the course of the last month and the playoff run, they were the number 5 defense. So I think in a lot of ways, the 49ers are absolutely betting on their pillars, not just to shepherd this new look roster along after they finish the process with the NFL draft, but also to potentially carry the team through some of the growing pains. So you look at the offense, which the 49ers, I think, still have a lot of firepower on, even though they've reworked some things around Brock Purdy. The offense may be asked to pick up a lot of slack for the defense until the defense can hopefully turn the corner around the time of maybe November, maybe December, down the stretch run of the regular season. That's all TBD. We don't even know exactly who's going to be on this 49ers defense yet, because the biggest method of talent acquisition this offseason is going to be the NFL draft. And that is what the 49ers are doing. They're consolidating on the draft in a young league. This is a young man's sport, young man's league. They need more speed. They need more of everything that I listed. This has been your 49ers Alarm Update. Hopefully we answered a lot of questions.